It's working. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Good to see you. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Dan Moskovitz. I'm one of the rabbis here at the synagogue. I know only a few of you, and most of you that I do know, it's only by face, so I'm hoping in a moment we can go over and introduce ourselves. But for those that just arrived, welcome. There's coffee, and I think there's coffee by now. Is there? It looks like it. There's coffee and some snacks right out here, and the washrooms are just to your left as you walk out. We're so glad that you came tonight. It's really a wonderful turnout, and it's an exciting thing for us. If you would like to sit at a table, we have tables and chairs too, but if you're comfortable, that's totally cool. We're going to record this session tonight, so you don't need to really take notes unless you want to, of course. And if you do want to, there's some notepads and pens that were floating around. So I'm a firm believer in connection before content, that we should get to know each other before we dive into the deep details of things. Let me just briefly introduce myself a little bit. So I've been the rabbi at this congregation. I'm the senior rabbi, so it's, I guess, like the rabbi in charge, for 10 years. I came from Los Angeles, where I was a rabbi for 13 years. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm now a Canadian citizen and a U.S. citizen. My taxes are complicated. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where my mother was a Jewish educator, and her mother before her was a Jewish educator. My grandfather owned a liquor store, but was the bar mitzvah tutor, the one that helped the kids learn how to chant the Torah. And my dad owned a clothing store chain. But I grew up, my mother was a Jewish educator. She worked with conversion students. That was the work that she did as a private conversion tutor, and her mother before her did that. So I really grew up in my home with people that were Jew curious or Jew adjacent. At our dining room table, I'd come home from school and they'd be studying and crying and laughing with my mom, and often at our home for holidays and celebrations and stuff like that as well. And I learned to really appreciate, one, the work that my mother and my grandmother were doing, but also to appreciate Judaism through the eyes of those that were not born into it and who had a chance to choose it for themselves or even just explore it for themselves. And I do this work in part because I love seeing it through your eyes. As a person that didn't get to choose to be Jewish, and I love it, and I've made it my life's work, I am forever inspired when people see things in this tradition that I love so much that I either didn't see myself or see it in a perspective in a new way, a new perspective from you. So my goal for this course, and we'll talk about it a little bit, is absolutely not to convert you. That is not the purpose of this class. My goal is that you leave here with a stronger spiritual foundation, whichever that is. If you came in with nothing and you left with some, that's terrific. And if you came in with one from another faith and you decided after listening to me for 3 nights that you have the best one there is and there's no way that you're leaving whatever it was that you have come in with, I would consider that a success. So the goal of this course is not to convert in any way, and I want to be clear about that, but to provide some information to answer your questions, maybe on a small level to reduce some of the mystery about Judaism that's out there in the world, that over time and history has led to Jews being persecuted in some ways, more than some ways, or just considered as an other, as a stranger, and to build bridges between cultures and faiths. That said, if you're here because you're in a relationship with somebody who's Jewish and you think this might be a step in a direction towards a further involvement or engagement with them and with Judaism, then this is a great place to start, as our congregation does offer follow-on courses all the way through to the process of conversion, which we can talk about at some point in our course of study. Beyond that, I'm married, I have 3 children. I have to get up at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning to drive one of them over the border so he can get on a flight out of Bellingham to fly to Philadelphia to go to a prom with a girl that he met at camp, which is freaking me and my wife out significantly, but we talked to the parents and, well, it should be okay. Yeah, I live in East Van. We have a dog. Her name is Mitzi. She's adorable. And I shouldn't mention my dog before my other 2 children. So I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and our daughter, Esty, who is 11. Yeah, I like to go fishing and play baseball. Well, I like to go fishing. I used to play baseball. I'm too old to play baseball. So why don't we start with this? If you could tell us your name, first or second, or just first, whatever is comfortable for you, and what you're hoping to get out of this evening. That would be terrific. It doesn't have to go any deeper than that, and if you're not comfortable doing any of that, you can just say pass. But who would like to begin? Sure, please.
Hi, my name is David Speed. I'm here because my daughter Ashley is a member of this temple, Ashley suggested this might be an interesting event to come to because my wife and I, who weren't born Jewish, now have a Jewish granddaughter. So just to try to learn a little more about her and what she seems to love, everything about it. So yeah, just to learn a little more about her experience.
Thank you, David.
Well, I'm David's what? Ashley's mom, Nora's granny. So, same reasons.
Wonderful. I guess we're going as a family.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Ashley. I converted through here several years ago. My daughter has been raised here since she was very little. I'm actually doing my adult bar mitzvah this weekend.
Yes,
And I'm president of the sisterhood and I teach at the school, so I got real involved.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Ashley drank the Kool-Aid.
I did.
Or the man is show.
So I am accompanying my parents so they can learn more about me.
Thanks, Ashley. Why don't we just keep going if we can? Go ahead. Yes.
My name is Allie. I am Jewish, but I wasn't raised Jewish, so I've always been kind of Jew curious, but my family went to World War II, so we were always pressured to hide our Jewish identity. But yet, my mother was a kosher Catholic. We had matzah for Passover. I didn't even know why. It's like, I thought everybody did it. We didn't have Easter or Christmas because I don't think my mother knew how to do it. But when I moved out here from Toronto, and I had two small girls, I had no idea how to teach them. So actually, Temple Sholom 30 years ago had a store called Yerushalayim Import, and Miriam ran it, and I went there, and I thought, I have no idea how to raise my children, but I didn't want them to go through the pressure that I went through to hide Jewish identity. I wanted them to know about it. So when I went to Yerushalayim Import, I said, I need a Jewish how-to handbook. And she goes, I know what you need. She pulled out a book, and I still have it, Jewish how-to handbook of it. So I started learning how to do it, but because of the pressure and being, honoring my parents, how do I, stay, be true to myself and honor them. So they both passed, so I feel safer coming out.
Well, we're glad you're here. Yeah. We can keep it short too. It's okay.
My name is Ophelia, and I originally come from Romania. I'm not Jewish. And I'm interested to find out what Judaism is and why Jewish people eat so many bagels.
Okay. Why we eat so many bagels?
Oh, yeah. Tastes good.
My name is Hava. I was brought up Jewish and born Jewish, and I was trying to reacquaint myself with Judaism. My dad studied Torah for about 40 years. Him and his side of the family, they were Holocaust survivors. And they actually had some of the major bagel manufacturing in the 80s, and a whole bunch of chain stores, all bagels and things. So I just thought I would mention.
Good to know.
So yeah.
My name's Mira. Apparently as Jewish blood, I was brought up by my nan who was Jewish, but she was sort of very positive about it, not really. So it was always running as a background program for me as a child, living with my nan. And I had to get things done by Friday before sunset, no chores, wasn't laid out. Certain things like Hanukkah I can remember, but it was very low key. But I never considered myself Jewish. It was just because I didn't really get involved in it, so it's always ran as a background program, I guess. And so I've always kept circling back to it, but never really committed to it or finding out more about it. And got engaged to have a relative, and we were talking about, she said, well, technically you're still Jewish. I was like, no, I'm not. Never had a bat mitzvah. So we kind of took the step to come and met Rabbi Dan. And yeah, so it's kind of a journey of discovery, really. For me, some things are very familiar from a child, which was a long time ago, but some things are very, very new, and all that. I bend my head around it. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you.
Get your mic back.
That's okay.
My name is Sherry, and I'm not Jewish, but for at least 30 years, I've been so interested in everything Jewish, and so I'm just here to find out more.
Thank you. Wait, over here.
Yeah, so I'm Des. I'm not Jewish. I'm kind of like the first generation in my family that pretty much everybody agrees isn't Jewish. So my grandma's Jewish, pretty much everybody agrees. My dad's Jewish, pretty much everybody agrees I'm not. I have been exploring religion in general for the greater part of a year, I guess. Like I had some family medical stuff that happened. Everything turned out well, thank God. But I've just been exploring it kind of in general. And then, you know, this past Passover, I was having it with my grandma, and you know, I realized I hadn't really explored Judaism that much. So I picked up some of the old books we had lying around, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. So I ended up here.
Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Kelly. Similar story. I've been interested in Judaism for 25 plus years, and then during COVID, sort of started getting a little bit more interested in researching and studying and that sort of thing. And so I'm just here to learn more.
Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Carlos. I'm originally from Colombia. I've been here about 7 years. I'm not Jewish, but I don't know. I just developed an interest for it. I started maybe 2015, 2014. I just had this conversation with a colleague at the time in Colombia, and she was going through a conversion process, and we just had this conversation. She was telling me about it, and I don't know, it was an interesting conversation, but I just left it at that. And then maybe 4 years later, I just found myself like kind of curious about it. I don't know why. It was like a seed in my mind. So I just started reading more and more about it, and yeah, this process has led me here, and I believe that yeah, there's still a lot of things to learn, and yeah, I'm excited about this.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ronald, and I don't have a lot to say, but I'm happy to be here. So.
Thanks, Ron.
I'm Tabitha. I guess you could say that I was brought up in a Catholic house, but at 11 decided that it was not for me, and I had a somewhat different family background in that. My mom was a professor at a university, and she said, if you can explain to me why, not just because you don't want to go to church. And I gave her my reasons around the faith and the issues that I had with it. And she said, do you respect me? Yes. Will you honor me? Yes. Then you will come to church. You do not have to participate in the sacraments. And so I did, but I never participated in the sacraments from that day on. And my mom also, I have to say, fully respects me. So when I, at 20, started exploring the Jewish faith and all wisdom faiths, okay, so it's not just Judaism, I kept coming back to Judaism, coming back, and the study of Torah, the study of the faith, and so I'm on a conversion path, and I guess that's where I am. And when I said that, because I told my mom, she goes, "Geez, thank God! I thought you were going to do this 20 years ago." So the whole family is very much behind my choices.
Thanks, Sam.
Hello, I am Ian. I grew up in Chilliwack, but I'm living in Ladner now. So my grandmother was Jewish, but she passed when I was pretty young, and same story as a lot of people. My family fled from Germany during World War II, but pretty much, not to say abandoned Judaism, but stopped practicing when we got to Canada. So I'm just interested in learning more about it, and now that I'm here and not in Chilliwack, I have the opportunity to.
Welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Angelika. I'm German, and I'm interested and have my whole life. My whole life I'm interested in Judaism. And 23 years ago, I met my husband in Prague. He's Jewish, and I have more experience in his family in Montreal. Now we are here. We married 3 years ago.
August 28th will be 3 years.
And yeah, I'm still interested very deeply, and yeah, this is the reason that I'm here. We listened to this course during COVID, but I want to have it in person. So
I'm
this
sure
is
glad
the
you
reason.
called on her first. I didn't have like that gentleman. I don't have that much to say.
But you can.
I don't have to.
Share your name.
Yes, I'll share my name. My name is Blair Roth. I have the privilege to be married to Angelica. And yeah, she was like really happy to be here after we'd gone together for a couple of years. It just came up, what are you doing for Christmas? I said, I'm going to celebrate Christmas. Oh, why is that? I said, well, I'm Jewish. And she was happy about it. I was kind of astonished. This was in Europe. And she's always had, like she said, an interest in Judaism. I'm here because I'm here with her. And also, I feel like I'd like to reconnect. And I was inspired by the rabbi and the way he presented things last year, or the year before. And so I'm reconnecting. I'm, born Jewish and raised Jewish, but I consider myself fairly ecumenical and interested in all people and all faiths, except I have strong ties and feelings for Judaism and Jewish tradition. So, there you go. Did I mention my name?
Blair.
My name is Mira, and I'm here with my partner Ed. And we have a 4-month-old baby. So I'm Jewish and Ed is not. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to learn more about Judaism together. I have quite a background. Like I went to Jewish day school and such, so I was raised really Jewish, but Ed hasn't been exposed to all that much beyond my family's get-togethers. So an opportunity to kind of have more dialogue together.
Congratulations on the baby. Who's watching the baby?
My mom.
Okay.
Yeah, she's invested.
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. Take the whole evening.
So I'm Ed. You heard a lot about me from Mira there. I'm not Jewish, originally from the UK 15 years ago. Because of my relationship with Mira and also with my baby boy Robin, they're both Jewish. I would like to know more about Judaism to make sure I can respect and understand their way of teaching culture.
Great. Thanks.
I'm Matthew. I was born and raised Jewish. I'm from Vancouver. I'm here with my partner Tess, who's not Jewish, and we're here together to learn a little bit more. I personally would like to do some reconnection as well. I've become a little distant from the faith just with school and things like that, because I went to Talmud Torah growing up, went to Camp Tikva, and it's just got a bit distant from it. So hopefully to kind of rein in a little bit, learn from myself, and then be here with Tess through the process as well. We've been together for a few years now, so yeah.
Hi, I'm Tess. I'm not Jewish. I'm here to learn more about Judaism because we're together and building a life together, so this is a great thing.
Thank you. Welcome all. Thank you so much for sharing. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so. Okay, so so tonight is one of 3 parts, as you saw, hopefully on the blurb about it. Tonight's about God and Jewish theology. And then next week will be about Jewish holidays, customs, and practices. And then the last week we're going to cover Jewish culture, history, and peoplehood. So I guess to start with sort of an introduction. So that sort of makes up, and this is probably the wrong way to use this word, but it is the hat trick or the trinity of sort of Jewish study. God, Torah, and Israel. That's those 3 pillars. While they leave out a whole lot, they also encompass a lot of what is sort of contained within Judaism. I'm trying to record that and this at the same time, so I'm touching some buttons here. So this is just a taste. Judaism is infinitely broad and deep. And as I mentioned, we do have opportunities to go deeper with what we call our Jewish information class, which is an 18-week course. Ashley took it, where we take those topics and go and sort of break them out into a much more granular kind of way. So I guess I would start with the question, why religion? Like, why is religion important? Why, and we'll get into this in terms of religion and spirituality, but for right now we'll just use those terms interchangeably. They're not. But why is religion important to you, if it is at all? I mean, you're here, so I'm going to assume that on one level it's at least a curiosity. what about religion in general, not Judaism specifically, what about religion appeals to you?
The wisdom of ages and the going back through ages of learning. Not to say you believe everything, but there's mores, there's thoughts, there's things to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it just touches.
Anyone else?
It gives us a sense of belonging to a community.
Mm-hmm. So shared values, shared story, right? Historical wisdom. Yeah.
I guess a shared sense of awe and also like a shared sense of obligation given you live in like a beautiful world, you know, like a sense of obligation to your community.
Mm-hmm.
I think it gives us a nice sense of foundation for things that may not have, maybe ambiguous, like life or death or marriage or birth.
Yeah.
Helps ground us and give us some ways to go forward.
I mean, it's interesting, in a world that has so much information, right, where nothing is not known. You can Google anything, and now you can AI just about anything. This quest for a sense of grounding and permanence and something that is true in the sense that it is not brand new, but has been practiced for a long time, I have found over the years, it still has a calling to people. Even though it is dated, even though as we look at biblical passages later on or whatever it is that are out of step with the times or the mores of today, there is still something fundamental in these stories. That over thousands of years and millions of people have found wisdom in this. Somehow that beats the latest Google search, right? Or the latest TikTok video that tells me I should do this with my face, like, or whatever it is. So the other part about religion is that we're getting into this question of God, which is really what tonight is about. So I want to actually begin with a statement that may be a little shocking, but in order to be Jewish, you do not need to believe in God. It is not a prerequisite to believe in God to be Jewish. Judaism is a tradition of practice, not belief. It doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what you do. So many Jews act as if. They operate under a system where the things that are required of us, which we're going to call commandments, in Hebrew it's mitzvot, so a bar bat mitzvah is a son or a daughter of the commandments. We'll break that out in a little bit. These are our moral obligations. This is the system that we have subscribed to, the rules that we agreed to follow. If you're a vegan, you have commandments in veganism. If you do, I don't know, yoga, you have, I guess I don't do yoga, but you have commandments in yoga. These are perhaps from a higher authority in the system that we've set up. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't have to believe in God. You just have to act as if those rules are as obligatory towards you as the rules of society, maybe even more so, because it's not about getting caught, right? Everything is seen. You can blow through a traffic light, and if nobody sees you and you don't get hit by a car, you're okay. In Judaism, all of these rules, which could be traffic lights, everything is seen, right? It's all caught on camera. God sees it all. In fact, one of the questions I often get is, why do Jews wear a yarmulke? And there are many explanations. A lot of them have to do with cultural, going back to Spain and the Spanish period, where people would wear their head covered as a sign of piety. But actually, the yarmulke represents God's eye, and that everything I do is seen as under God, and that God sees all that I do. So if that's the system that you operate in, whether you believe there's a God or not, that is essentially to live your life on camera. So without God, there might not be any objective good or evil. God sets the boundaries, whether we agree with them or not, and Jews will argue about them all the time. This is good and this is bad or evil. God sets the rules. Again, God is a structure here. God is a framework. And perhaps there's no intrinsic meaning to life. If life is not considered to be precious or special, which is what our tradition teaches, that it is precious or special, then life has meaning. So one of the things that we'll learn is that in Judaism, as opposed to, let's say, Christianity, and I'm not an expert on Christianity or Islam, so I'm going to reference them sometimes probably imprecisely, but in Judaism, this life is the reward. It's not about an afterlife. So the reason life has meaning is because you are alive. And the only time that we get is this time. We're not trying to get into the next level. So how we spend this time, how we interact with people and interact with the world, how we see ourselves as perhaps extensions of God in the world, because all human beings are created in God's image. That's the blessing of being created. This, right now, is the reward. And so what is the meaning of life? To make the most meaning out of your life. To make the best of the world that we're in, not just for yourself, but for others. And Judaism is a whole system about trying to do that. As Thoreau said, to squeeze the marrow out of life, to suck the marrow out of life, would be a very Jewish statement. So why do we need religion? Why can't I just be spiritual? And so here's I think the challenge for us in modern day, because we have a lot of people that come to me and they say, I'm a spiritual rabbi. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. So if I can ask you, because you might use that terminology, when you say you're spiritual but not religious, what do you mean? I mean, I think I know what you mean, but what do people mean when they say that? Have you ever heard anybody say that? I'm not making that up, right?
So it's not bound by dogma.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, that's the reason I gave my mom my 11. Okay. By the way, is I do not believe that dogma, and I don't believe one religion is better than another religion. They each have wisdom and learning. But I've learned over 50 years that there are obligations, that you are part of a community, and just being spiritual is not enough for me.
Right. Anybody want to add to that?
They don't go to church, maybe, they're spiritual, so they don't really participate in rituals and Sunday worship and all that. And it's a little bit lax as a term. To be spiritual can mean a lot of things, not necessarily that you believe in God, you can believe in other things. So.
Yeah, so I say it here on the slide. I think that spirituality is religion on your terms. Whatever you decide is meaningful, whatever the rules are that you decide, that's your religion. But you can change those all the time because they are not dogmatic. They're not grounded in some kind of higher authority. And religion is spirituality on God's terms. Religion is to say, this is going to be meaningful for you whether you find meaning for it or not. Or this is going to be obligatory for you whether you find meaning for it and meaning in it and not. As an example, let's just talk about food, because we were talking about bagels before. So for Jews, we don't eat, I mean, you probably know this, but we don't eat pork. Okay, there's a whole bunch of other things we don't eat, but we don't eat pork. So, and we don't eat milk and meat together. So a slice of pepperoni pizza is like not kosher, which is the type of proper eating in Judaism, on 2 levels. You might like pepperoni pizza. It may be your go-to comfort food. So for some system to come in and say you can't eat that, and then not even to provide some kind of common sense reason as to why, right? If I said, oh, because it's going to give you this terrible disease, it's bad for you this way or that way, then you could find a reason. But in truth, with the laws of keeping kosher, there aren't any moral, ethical reasons, really. I mean, we've tried to apply some to them, but they're actually these group of commandments that are just given because God said, eat this and don't eat that. And God could have said, eat pepperoni pizza and don't eat, vegetarian pizza. I don't know, but God said don't eat pepperoni pizza, not specifically. So to accept that as an obligation upon yourself might actually be meaningful, because not everything we can do should we do, right? So, and it's not that there is always spirituality in denying yourself something. Judaism is not a religion about denial of the joys of life. In fact, just the opposite. But when you have to think about the food that you eat, and when you go into a market and you say, I can't eat everything here, there are things that are just not permitted to me, then we begin to think, and I think in a more intentional way about what we put into our bodies. Now, we could modify that in modern terms and think, okay, I'm only going to eat organic food. I'm only going to eat food that's raised in a humane kind of way. And that many Jews have now done and added to the laws of kashrut. You're in a Reform synagogue. So one of the things we'll look at in our last class is the difference between Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, for example, along a spectrum of Jewish practice. Orthodox being the most traditional, Reform being the most progressive is one way to say it. And so Reform Judaism has taken modernity and said we need to live in this world and learn from it. Orthodoxy, by the very definition of it, just wants to maintain things as they were, no matter what the march of progress or science is. So, long way to go, that Reform Judaism has adapted the laws of keeping kosher to include things like the ethical treatment of animals and organics and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it says I can't eat this. How that impacts my life, to have something say I can't, or something say that I must give a portion of the money that I make to charity, that I must welcome the widow, the orphan, the stranger, or love my neighbor as myself, which can be very hard to do at times. That has a calling on me, and that, for me, I subscribe to those things, and so it gives direction and meaning to my life. And so, with religion, there is a difference between right and wrong, or good and evil, and there is an intrinsic meaning to life. We can't speak without language, and we can't be religious without religion. Right? So in order to be religious, you have to subscribe to something. And if we all make our own religion, I'm not sure that's religion. So the comments to why religion, because you're part of something, you know what it means when you find your group. Whether it's your group that we all vote the same way, or we all, practice what we do in the same way, whatever that is, there is a sense of not just commonality, but a camaraderie and power that comes with that. I mean, we are a 1,000-family congregation. So when we decide to do something, we can actually affect change in areas that I, as an individual, never could. So as an example, our congregation got very involved at the height of the Syrian refugee crisis in sponsoring particularly Kurdish families, Syrian Kurdish families, to come to Canada. Even though Canada has ways that you can do that with a group of 5 and the whole thing, when we got involved in it, we were able to affect significant change in those families' lives in ways that I, sitting at home looking at those pictures, if you remember back to that, or we've sponsored now 12 Ukrainian families, looking at the news, tearing my heart out, couldn't do anything. So religion gives you that power that comes with the association of your group. And when you match that with your values, well, I mean, what better way to spend your time than to be able to actually influence and move on your values on a larger scale. Let me stop there. Questions about any of that? Challenging to any of that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the, so you mentioned the spirituality and religion, so I'm wondering if they're more like complementary, since we could understand just the religion part as a set of rituals and actions that you do, but maybe if they're just like things you do mechanically, then maybe they, over time, they lose meaning, or even sometimes you might end up doing, I don't know, like wrong things, but in that sense, maybe also being spiritual and that gives some meaning to religion, and the other way around. Also, religion also takes spirituality to a higher level. So.
Yeah. So there's actually that tension exists within Judaism in 2 Hebrew words, which I wasn't sure I was going to talk about tonight, but called keva and kavanah. Keva is that structure, that rubric of practice. I do this, I do that, I eat this, I don't eat that. Kavanah is the intention or the meaning behind it. And it's not that those things are in tension with each other, but they are in balance with each other. They're complementary to each other. For some Jews, and let's say on the more traditional Orthodox spectrum, they actually find their spirituality in just doing the things, right? Checking off the list. Every day, I did all the things that were expected of me. I'm a good Jew. Others, it's not about checking off the list. It's that one thing on that list that is the most meaningful to them, right? So if on that list is I am supposed to, love the stranger as myself, and I set out every day to make sure that I am welcoming to people that I don't know, that I'm that friendly face. And every time I do that, I feel a sense of holiness, a sense of sacred purpose. And it doesn't matter how many things I check off my list because I did that one thing. So it can be yes and, I guess is what I would say. And I think you're right. It is the 2 of them working together. So as I said, my aim is not answers, but spiritual growth. I'm not here to convert you. This is like the disclaimer that you have to put on things. And I invite you to allow yourself to be open to the directions that spiritual exploration can take you. So let's talk about God. Okay? What do you think about God? If I say God is, Who's brave enough to fill in the blank? Yeah.
I'm still.
You're still on the previous screen? Want me to go back?
I'm just stuck on your statement about you can be Jewish without believing in God.
Yeah.
Like, I was raised Christian, and as far as I recall, the Old Testament is something Christians and Jews share, and
Yes.
it's all about God, because God started it all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm struggling to understand how you can be Jewish without believing in God, because then are you not believing the Old Testament?
So again, I said Judaism is a tradition of practice, not belief. We're not judged on our thoughts. We're judged on our actions. It really doesn't matter. I mean, it does. But at a fundamental level, it doesn't matter why you don't eat the pepperoni pizza. It just matters you don't eat the pepperoni pizza. So if you accept that system as a binding upon you, have a calling on you, that's not only good enough, that's probably better is the wrong term here, but that is more observant than most people that are born Jewish. Because most people that are born Jewish don't care about those things. They may or may not believe in God, and they eat pepperoni pizza. So, I mean, this is a little bit of a flippant answer. But at its core, using the Judaism Christianity sort of comparison, as I understand it, in Christianity, to question is a sign of a lack of faith. In Judaism, questioning is a sign of faith. Struggling with the question, what is God? What is God? Is there a God? What does God want of me? How do I fulfill God's commandment or calling upon me? That's a sign of faith. In fact, the whole rabbinic tradition, not just the stuff that I do, but all the rabbis that came before, and you've heard of a collection of Jewish writing called the Talmud, which is the Jewish legal texts, is filled with arguments about, well, what is actually being asked of us here? One of my favorite passages is about why does God love the Jewish people? This is a question that comes up amongst these rabbis that lived in the year 200 CE. Why does God love the Jewish people, they want to say, they ask. And one rabbi answers, because we argue over the bulk of an olive. Now, what's the bulk of an olive? That's actually the question. How big is an olive? Show me the size of an olive. You're all going to do some various versions of this, right? And the rabbis want to know, what's the size of an olive? Why? Because anything larger than an olive, any morsel of bread larger than an olive, constitutes a meal, and that requires a blessing. Anything less than the size of an olive doesn't constitute a meal, doesn't require a blessing. So we need to know what the size of an olive is. But your olive is this big, and my olive is this big. So what's the size of an olive? And just how they get to that is interesting in itself, like what's an olive. But the argument itself is what's so endearing to God, because they really want to get it right. Why do they want to get it right? Because they believe in the system. They believe that this is their obligation. Whether ultimately that system comes from heaven or comes from the wisdom of the generations, I'm not going to say it's irrelevant, but it is less relevant in Judaism than the practice itself. Does that make sense?
If I can add too, most of Israel is secular.
Israel meaning the country, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, most of Israel is secular or atheist, but they're still Jewish because they're probably kosher.
Yeah, well, so most Israelis keep kosher de facto because there are mostly kosher restaurants, not because they choose to. I mean, one of the interesting things is it's harder to be Jewish in North America than it is in Israel. And therefore, I think that those that choose to be Jewish in North America as opposed to Israel, again, I don't want to use the term better Jews, but they are more active Jews because it's not being done for them. When my kids go to school, during Passover, before they went to a Jewish school, they went to public elementary school, and so during the holiday of Passover, Jews don't eat bread. So for them to go into the lunchroom with their matzah sandwich was a statement, not always a comfortable one. Although in our family we talked about it as a symbol of pride, and you stand up and you explain your piece of cracker to whoever asks or whatever it is. But that's an exercise in this practice. Any other questions on that?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sort of.
Please build on it. Yeah.
Building on that. Does it matter whether it's Reform or Orthodox? Or like, do some Jewish people believe in God? Like
Many Jewish people believe in God. Yeah.
I mean, is there a synagogue? No. Is there a class of Jewish people that believe in God? Like, is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where's the dividing line?
Yes. So right up and down Oak Street.
He's not kidding.
So in an oversimplified way, Orthodox Jews believe that the Torah was written by God, that every single word of, so most traditional Jews, that every single word of it is a divine creation, and therefore God exists, and God said these things, and it's not for you to change them. You can question them, absolutely question them, but you're not allowed to change them. You may do it differently because you understand it differently, but you can't change it. Moving further down Oak Street, we'll leave out the conservatives because they're stuck in the middle. And if you saw the Karate Kid, right, do karate, yes, fine. Don't do karate, that's fine. But do karate so-so and you get crushed like a grape. Do you remember that line? Coming down here to our synagogue, we believe that the Torah was written by human beings, but inspired by their attempt to describe their interactions with the divine. Their interactions with moments that they couldn't explain, with events in their life, like the birth of a child, that they just didn't have the words or the language to explain. And even if they had the science, it was on a deeper spiritual level. So it's not that people in this congregation don't believe in God, they absolutely do, all in their own ways. And we're going to get into some different definitions of God in a moment. So you can believe in God and be Jewish. I'm just trying to say that it's not a fundamental requirement you believe in God. Most Jews have some belief in God, even if it is fairly pediatric from their days in Hebrew school and hasn't sort of grown to match where they are in life. But they have this sense of, not because they are born Jewish, but because our tradition continuously retells this story of redemption and God's presence in the world and in our lives. Yeah?
Just one observation. When I attend the Orthodox, which has been a long time since I've attended Orthodox service, and I attended a service last week, which I really enjoyed.
There or here?
Here.
Okay.
I enjoyed there too.
Okay, yeah.
But I enjoyed it here. And I just noticed that Shema Yisrael, like everybody here, still holds, it's a very awe-inspiring moment.
Right.
And as it is in Orthodox. So I guess what you're saying is the Orthodox, they're really hung up on God, and God, you're the only one. And Reform observe the ritual, but they're not that stuck on it. Or am I just reading something?
I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, so yes in generalizations, but in specifics, if you go to pick any Orthodox Jew or any Reform Jew, and you may get the same answer from both of them to that question. But let's go deeper. We can't do this in just one answer or one slide. So I mean, questions come up. So I think we've answered the question, what do we think that Judaism says about God? I think we've said a few of those things. But, there are these larger questions. Does God work in the world? When is God? Is God all the time, or is God only in holy moments? Is God only in things that are associated with religion, but not with pepperoni pizza? And can you doubt God and be a good person, be a good Jew? So I do want to give one more thought to that comment, which is that the word Yisrael, and we're called the B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel. So B'nai is children, B'nai mitzvah, children, sons of the commandments. Yisrael means to struggle with God. Yisra is to struggle, El is God. And the name actually comes from the Bible, from the story of Jacob. Jacob, who wrestled with an angel, if you remember in these stories in Genesis. And at the end of the wrestling, before Jacob will let the angel go, and the angel wrenches Jacob's hip, Jacob says, I won't let you go till you change my name. And the angel changes Jacob's name from Yaakov, the one that latches onto, because he was latching on to his brother Esau in the womb. Changed the name to Yisrael, the one who struggles with divine beings. What does that mean? It means that at the core of being Jewish, because we're called the Jewish people, the B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, is to struggle with God. In all of its ways, wrestle with God, and all the manifestations of arguing and grappling with and wondering about and arguing, that is a Jewish expression. Right? So there is an old joke about Jews constantly arguing, and 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and the whole thing. It's a Jewish way of being. And why do we do it? We do it to get to the truth. The goal of all of those rabbinic texts, the goal of Jewish thought and learning is the olive. We're going to argue and argue and argue so we can get to the right answer. And we may never know if we got to the right answer. In fact, much of Jewish tradition doesn't say the olive is this size. It says this rabbi concluded it was this size, and this rabbi concluded it was this size, and ultimately you're going to choose. And that might be why you're at Shaare Zedek, the Orthodox synagogue, or at Temple Sholom, because I think the olive is this size, and they think the olive is that size, and you like the olive this size. That's your truth. That's okay. We are expansive enough in Jewish thought that there's room for different olive growers, sizers. Okay, so we're going to watch a funny clip. Hopefully you consider it funny. From the movie Oh God with George Burns, and this is, oh gosh, Died of Plain Grass. Sorry? Yeah, John Denver. Thank you.
Jerry? Jerry? That's right.
Is that you?
In person.
You're not on the radio?
Have you got a radio out here?
No.
Bingo.
You're here? In my bathroom?
Come take a look.
I can't. I'm naked.
You think I don't know what you've got? That was another little goof of mine. Shame. I don't know why I thought we needed shame. Come on out. Don't catch cold. Not what you expected, huh? I picked a look you could understand. For someone else, I would look different. I could do any face, voice, whatever. I could even be a woman. Feeling a little strange, huh?
Very strange.
Like you're gonna faint. You know what's good for that? Shaving.
Shaving?
Sometimes when you don't feel normal, doing a normal thing makes you feel normal. Yeah, start shaving.
Why me?
Why not you?
You mean there's no special?
Life is a crapshoot. Like the millionth customer who crosses a bridge, gets to shake hands with the governor. You throw that picture because you're better than everybody?
I'm not?
You're better than some, but not as good as others. But you crossed the bridge at the right time.
If you wanted to see me, why didn't you just appear over my bed?
Hollywood. Next question.
People are always praying to you. Do you listen?
I can't help hearing. I don't always listen.
Then you don't care?
Of course I care. I care plenty. But what can I do?
What can you do? But you're God.
Only for the big picture. I don't get into details.
Then whatever happens to us
happens. Here, I put in a new blade.
You mean there's no plan, no scheme to guide our destinies?
A lot of it is luck.
Luck?
I gave you a world and everything in it. It's all up to you.
But we need help.
That's why I gave you each other.
But if you're so involved with us,
yeah,
how can you permit all the suffering that goes on in the world?
How can I permit the suffering?
Yeah.
I don't permit the suffering. You do. Free will. All the choices are yours.
Choices? What choices?
You can love each other, cherish and nurture each other. You can kill each other. You're also turning the sky into mud. I look down, I don't believe the filth. Using rivers for toilets. Poisoning my fishes. You want a miracle? You make a fish from scratch. You can't. And when the last one is gone, that'll be that. 86 on the fishes. Goodbye sky, so long world, over and out.
I thought you said we were going to make it.
I said you've got to make it work.
You don't care.
I do care.
Then do something about it.
I did. I gave you a mouth, didn't I? How I feel, what I said.
Fine. And how do I convince anybody that I've actually seen you, that you exist?
Simple. Show them this.
Had you ever seen that?
Yeah.
It's a great movie if you haven't. I mean, it's old and dated. I don't know how well it stands up, but it does actually. So look, it's not intended to be a Jewish film by per se, but that is a Jewish movie. That is a Jewish theology in its oversimplification of what Judaism believes about God, which is it's not on God, it's on us. So all of these commandments, all of these rules and obligations, they're there to guide us so that we don't screw up the world, or that we can fix what we've screwed up. And whatever is screwed up about it, we did that. When God gave the world, it was perfect in all of its design, and we can take this back to, by the way, I don't read the Torah as a history book. I don't read the Bible as a history book. I read it as folk tales. It's not a good science book. It's not a good history book, but there's wisdom in it. So if you take the Garden of Eden, what's the lesson from that story, right? This place that is perfect, and then who screws it up? Human beings. In their hubris, in their ego, in their lack of humility, their amorous desires, whatever it is. And so whatever's broken in this world was not broken by design. It was broken by us. Maybe it's broken by generations before us, by unintentional consequences to good intentions. Whatever it is, it's on us to fix it. Jews don't pray to God to come and fix the world. We pray that we will be so motivated as to fix the world in the image that God intended. You might have heard the term tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. Reform Jews in particular, we use it all the time. There's a second part of the sentence. It's tikkun olam malchut shaddai, in the image that God intended it to be. Restore the world is probably better than repair. Restore the world to what it was before you screwed it up. So, talk about a mission. That's the mission of human. I would say it's a mission of humanity, but to the extent that Jews are chosen as a chosen people for a specific mission, that is the specific mission of the Jews. Fix what is broken in the world. Not just the Jewish stuff. Anything. Okay, so let's get into this. So what is God? What is God? Hard question. Can you try a definition? I've heard them all, so please. And they're all correct in one way or another.
Something to reach out to when you're in trouble.
Okay. Something, right? Not someone necessarily, something.
That thing that you believe is there.
Mm-hmm. Well,
It's part of every one of us, and we are part of everything.
Tracy Chapman's song in my head. What if God was one of us? Just a stranger on the bus?
Maybe a higher power.
Okay.
With what?
A higher power. Power greater than ourselves.
Have life force and flow.
The source of things, right? The force. It's a Star Wars now. So, my favorite analogy, and there are many, and they are all just that, analogies or metaphors, and I get confused which is which. God is love. And that sounds wonderful when you can put it on a poster or something like that, but the explanation of it, I think, is even more insightful. So a story goes that a rabbi, actually a rabbi that I know, because he wrote this in his book, was tucking in his granddaughter one night. We'll give him his name. His name is Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory. He's one of the great theologians of the 20th century. He was tucking in his granddaughter late at night, I think her name was Rachel, and she said, "Grandpa, how do I know that God exists?" And he said, because he was this great theologian, "Do you believe that I love you? Do you believe that my love for you exists?" And she says, "Absolutely." "Do you believe my love for you is real?" She says, "Absolutely." And he said, "Okay, then touch my love." And she went to touch his hands that he uses to hug her, and she went to touch his lips that he uses to kiss her, and she went to touch his ears that listen to her, and his heart and all those things. But none of that was the love. And so he said, God is like love. Love is real. Love will make you do crazy things. When I was a teenager and I thought I was in love, I drove 90 miles an hour on the freeway to go see my girlfriend for 15 minutes before I got too late for curfew to get home because she lived however far away it was. Love will make you, some of you were in love with the person here. You can just add the list of the crazy things you've done for that person or that they've done for you. Love is a powerful force in your life, but you can only touch the evidence of it. It itself, love, is just that. It's a force. It's a thing that calls you and draws you. I think that's what the best definition I've come across with God is. It's a force that can drive you towards things. And if you believe in that force, and again, here it gets easier to believe in God if you don't believe that God intercedes in your life. If you just believe that God set the rules of the game for you to follow, and you've signed up for that game, then it's a lot easier than old man on a beard with a cloud, that's going to help you win the lottery or God forbid give somebody cancer or something like that. So rather than speaking of God as the subject or substantive of the sentence, God is just, God is love. We should think of God as the predicate. That is the active and feeling part of the sentence. Thus, justly is God. Love is godly. We humans are called to emulate the godly attributes which qualify us as partners of God and creatures in the divine image. We are extensions of God in the world. So when we say that there's a bit of God in all of us, Jews really operate on that. I hesitate now to use the word belief, so I'm just going to say operate on that. But this idea that human beings are created in the image of God, in Hebrew it's called B'Tselem Elohim, is also a core fundamental Jewish belief. So if I believe that you are created in the image of God, and you are an evil person, then you are destroying the image of God that's inside of you. But you are we don't believe in saints in Judaism, but you are a wonderful, kind, loving, empathic person. You are illuminating, you're enhancing the image of God in the world. That's inside of you. Do you want to diminish the God that's in you, or do you want to elevate the God that's in you? That's up to you. Do you see it in others or not? Same thing. And then I love this definition at the bottom here. I got this from work that I do in the 12-step world. God is an acronym for good, orderly direction. And I personally find that to be quite strong for me. That what is God? God is the right thing to do in that particular situation. And it's not always clear what that is. And that's where study comes in. That's where the wisdom texts come in. And I think that a lot of that lives in Judaism. I don't know about other religions, so I can't speak to them, but I know that there is overlap, so I would say it lives in other religions as well. Judaism doesn't always get it right, or the interpretations that we have are not always interpreted appropriately. We have stuff still within our tradition about treatment of women and treatment of the stranger and treatment of people of different orientations and all those things that I find abhorrent. And that's why I'm on this side of Oak Street and not that side of Oak Street. But for me, it's what is the fundamental underlying value. What's the intention behind the rule? And when I get to the intention is love the stranger, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Find that image of God in others. And so that, for me, supersedes all this other ridiculousness about these people can't marry those people, or these people aren't allowed to do those things because of this, that, or the next thing. Orthodoxy would get caught up in some of those details. They might want to do it that way, but they can't justify it legally. Conservative Judaism, by the way, tries to find a way to justify it legally. And they'll twist themselves into a pretzel to do it, and sometimes they'll conclude that they can't, even though they want to. For me, I'm like, well, then we got to change the rules. Because right is right. Again, stop me at any point. You have questions about any of this? Okay. So, it was mentioned before about the Shema. So one of the it's not a prayer, it's a proclamation in Judaism. By the way, this is Hebrew, and Hebrew is read from right to left. These are the consonants, these are the vowels. Sometimes the vowels appear above as well. It's an ancient alphabet. It's the original language that the Torah was written in. But the Hebrew language itself actually wasn't spoken as a language of the streets until really the establishment of the State of Israel, or let's say pre-Israel, late 1800s, early 1900s. It was very much a Lashon Kodesh, a holy language. So here is the proclamation of Jewish faith, the oneness of God. And the 6 words are Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. For the most part, just about every Jew in the world knows those 6 words in that order. They might not know, the difference between a pepperoni pizza and a cheeseburger or whatever. I mean, they probably know the difference between those two, but not whether one's kosher or the other isn't. They might not know what prayer we were doing when they hear a melody in the synagogue, but they know those 6 words. And for the most part, they know what they mean. If you ask many Jews, they would say it means there's one God. But what does that mean? So, on one level, it means that this idea of a Trinity doesn't exist within Judaism. There's no intermediary between you and God. You don't pray through me as a rabbi. It's between you and God, just like John Denver and George Burns in the shower scene. Sounds kind of weird. But the other part of it is that God is in all things, the oneness of God. And I like this definition better than the one that I grew up with, which is, there's only one God. I accept that. There is only one God, and all these things that we pray to, that we give godly attributes to, they're all the same. They're all part of the same. God is big enough to be in trees and in people and in all sort of living organisms. So it's about finding the God in all those things and seeing God in that. So if you see God in a tree, which is another way of saying if you see something divine, something holy in it, something of value, of worth, then you treat that tree with respect and with care, just as you would an animal, just as you would a human being. But the difference is that trees don't have the capacity to treat human beings in a way, unless you read the Shel Silverstein book, The Giving Tree. And animals, as much as my dog loves me, doesn't have that higher level of thinking to be able to be discerning. My dog would love you if you had a hot dog in your hand also. But human beings actually can be discerning in that, and we can intentionally love things that are hard to love. We can intentionally love things that don't love us back. And that is what it means to see God in all things, to listen, to hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, that God is in all things. Yes?
When you say there's no go-between between us and God, what about angels and things like that?
Yeah, so there are angels in Judaism. They largely come later, and they come out of mystical traditions that developed post-Christianity. And I think that was in some ways a marketing ploy. Well, they've got angels, we've got to have angels. That's what happened with afterlife. Judaism doesn't really have an afterlife, but Christianity came up with a great afterlife, so we had to come up with something. But no, we don't pray through angels. So the way that Judaism understands angels is they are attributes of God. They are part of God's personality. So if you were to call upon an angel, let's say, in your very sort of mystical practice of Judaism, which is not everybody's cup of tea, it would be, I want that rachamim, the angel of Rachmael, the angel of compassion. I want to feel God's compassion in my life at this time. I want to feel Gabriel, God's strength and power. I need that in my life. Please, yeah.
Wouldn't that kind of cross over into idolatry then?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So where's the...
Yeah, so it's not idolatry in that it's not an inanimate object that you are praying to. It's an idea. It's an anthropomorphic way of understanding this broader concept. And we do that all the time. Right, I might have mentioned this here. I can't remember. I taught 3 classes today, all sort of on this topic. I think it was in the other class that I mentioned this. That when we say God's hand, or when we say God's voice, what we're really doing is we're just trying to take this very complicated concept and put it into terms that we understand. I think that's what angels are also, honestly. There's nothing that I read, that I believe, that where Judaism is, angels with wings and halos floating around us and stuff like that. But if it helps you get to that place, and it doesn't get in the way of your practice, right? You don't start praying to angels, because if you start praying to angels and not to God, then you've taken an off-ramp off of Judaism and you're just something else.
What if you are Jewish and you have a revelation?
So,
are you gonna stay Jewish?
So it depends what the revelation is. Is the revelation
like God talks to you? I mean, so many people go through a lot of experiences like that. Like you are very sick on your deathbed, and something happens, and God comes and speaks to you, and
I think that actually people experience that all the time. I mean, so look, the purpose of prayer in Judaism is not to move God, it's to move you. We send a prayer out. God, please heal my loved one. It's not that we're asking God to come down. We would love it if God could and remove the cancer. But it's to move us to do everything we can to bring about healing in that person's life. And that might mean that because you prayed for that and maybe it didn't come through in the way you wanted, you go on to become some world-renowned oncologist and find, God willing, a cure for cancer or that particular cancer. So your prayer there is to move you to be a source of healing in the world or in their life. Yeah.
But you yourself, you were never in a situation in your life when you were close to death, or somebody you loved was in that particular circumstance. And if yes, in all honesty, did you kneel down and pray and say, God, help me? I'm just understanding.
So I'm going to say yes and no. So I've been in that situation many times a week. As I sit with loved ones and people, at their bedside, and I spoke about it last year at the High Holy Days. My mother went in for knee replacement surgery, ended up in the ICU 3 times, almost died, and I was at her bedside through the whole thing. And there was, and maybe this is the intellectual part of me that gets in the way sometimes. Like I've read too much. There were certainly moments when I would beg God to save her, to heal her. But I think I fell back on those as almost a talisman, as a comfort object. But what I really wanted was for those doctors to find the thing, to fix the problem, to be so good. My mom had internal bleeding, they didn't know about it, and they had to go in, they couldn't do a surgery. So they went through an endoscopy and they had to stop the bleeding. And it took 4 staples to do it because the first 3 didn't hold. And what I was praying for there was that doctor was really good at his job. And that he would stick with it because he cared about my mom, like she was his mom. And he would try and try and try until he couldn't try again. That's what I was praying for. Because he saw my mom as an extension of God in the world, as a holy being, as this irreplaceable entity, maybe he tried harder. And yeah, of course I've called out, I'm on an airplane, right? There's no atheists in foxholes or turbulence, right? So you're on an airplane, like, if you'll just stop the bumping, I will always go to synagogue. I'll never eat pepperoni pizza again, whatever it is. And then you land and you're like, oh, I'm not going to stick to that. So we do those things. That doesn't mean that it doesn't make us bad people. It may make us inconsistent, but we're human beings. So another thing is Judaism, there's no saints in Judaism. I said, we don't believe in perfection. You can't be perfect. We're just looking for progress.
I just wanted to,
yeah.
He was saying nobody dies an atheist.
Right, I guess so. Yeah.
It just seems, going back to the question that this gentleman brought up before, is when you said that you don't have to believe in God to be Jewish. It's through practice. But it seems like belief in God is so intrinsic to being Jewish. I don't know.
Yes, I mean it is. It makes it a lot easier, right? I mean it is. There is no doubt.
I'm not speaking from someone that has a good connection with God.
No. So look, when my friends who are Orthodox, their theology is very simple. God said it, so I do it. Right? They don't argue with it. It is easier. I would argue that it's harder to be a Reformed Jew because I have to evaluate everything. Is this really worth it? Is this right? Is this best for the world, best for my family, society? I'm constantly asking that question. They're not. That doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't make them simplistic. It just, that's how it works for them. It just doesn't always work that way for everybody. On everything. Okay. Moving on. How are we doing on time? What time did it say this class ends?
10.
10. No, not 10. I can't get to 10. So 9 it said? Okay.
Yeah.
No way I'm going to get through all this by then, but okay. I'm going to skip this part, actually, it's not that interesting. Oh, well, no. Okay. Okay, so there's the question, why did God create human beings? Like, why go through all this? Why create something? It's like, why do you get a pet, right? All they're going to do is take your time, eat through your house, right? I can't go away on a vacation. I can't go away because I got to have somebody to watch the dog and all this stuff. What benefit was there to creating human beings? And so so the question is, the Talmud asks, there's a debate that lasted for 2.5 years as to whether it would have been better if humanity had not been created. Because of all the terrible things that humanity has done, George Burns turning the sky to mud, all the horrible things we've done to each other, all the wars we've caused, all the pain and heartache we've had. What's your answer? What do you think they said?
He wanted to extend his image, his personality. He wanted to.
So, but the question is not why; it's whether it was better.
Oh, it was better.
Should human beings have been created or not? That's the question. Yes.
I think the eventual conclusion probably would have been that it's worse that humanity was created. And I guess kind of egotistically, I don't like the idea of that answer, but if I thought about it long enough, I'd probably come to the same conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know many parents of children who are like, look, I'm glad I have kids, but truthfully, I would have more money, I'd have more time with the person I love. We could travel more if I didn't bring these dependents into the world. And they better take care of me when I get older, because all that kind of stuff. So they had this debate, they devoted, and here was the answer. Only through a fully experienced knowledge of the abyss, where it would have been better for humankind not to have been created, can a rigorous, even tragic optimism be achieved. Were it not for difficult thoughts and challenging feelings, we could not approach the world fully. The rabbis concluded it would be better if human beings had not been created, but we are created, and so that is why you need Torah. If you hadn't created human beings, you wouldn't need the Torah, because they wouldn't need the guide. They wouldn't need the instructions on how to live. So they then said, well, if God hadn't, maybe God created humanity because God wanted to give us the Torah. And so human beings were necessary. We needed to break the world so that human beings could be empowered to fix it. You need to have children, I'm not saying you have to, in order to really experience what it's like to live. Maybe. I'm not advocating one or the other, but I think children are pretty cool. So Judaism does not elevate suffering to a religious good, and I want to make that clear. It is, however, acknowledged as being an intrinsic part of the messiness of life, and hopefully provides insight that makes us more whole, that enables us to empathize, that pushes us to be partners in the ongoing work of creation. Embrace the messy, right? Embrace the complexity of things, because in working that out, in living in that complexity, that's actually where that's where life is lived. You can't live in the Garden of Eden, where everything is taken care of for you. Why did Adam and Eve have to leave? Because they weren't really living. They didn't know that they existed. Everything was done for them. And it's only when you actually, and here again, we're not embracing suffering, but when things are hard, you know this from your own life, that you actually begin to appreciate how hard those things are, how hard your parents work to attain what you're trying to get, all those kinds of things. And that, again, adds intrinsic meaning to life. Comments, questions?
It was great that we are created. We have been created. Like, look at this adventure.
Yeah, I think so too. And also, look at the terrible things we've done to each other, right? So, boy, our responsibility for not doing that is even stronger. Because we have this, I'd say this to wedding couples all the time. I say, look, you let the other person closer than anybody else to you in your life, which means you have the power to make life heaven or hell on earth for your partner. Right? Nobody can hurt you like the ones you let that close. And at the same time, maybe nobody can elevate you, nobody can can partner with you like the ones that you bring that close. Why is there suffering? We can make 3 statements about the world, but we can keep only 2 of them in order to have a coherent worldview. There is suffering and evil in the world. God is all-powerful, and God is good. Which 2 do you keep? You can only, which of those 3, which are true?
2 and 3.
2 and 3. God is all-powerful, God is good. So there's not suffering and evil in the world?
1 and 2. That is suffering.
1, 3.
So there's no denying that there is suffering and evil in the world. My son calling me. So we've got to keep that one. Okay? Most of us will not deny, although some of you did, that there is suffering and evil in the world, so that statement must stay. But what about the next 2? If God is all-powerful and allows suffering and evil to flourish, then God must not be good. And therefore, not a God any sane person would worship. Because God allows suffering. If God's all-powerful, God allows suffering. Likewise, Rabbi Kushner rejected, this comes from Rabbi Harold Kushner, blessed memory, the idea that suffering is punishment for sin, which has been a traditional Jewish idea. Therefore, if the choice is between a good God and an all-powerful God, Kushner keeps the good God and discards the idea of an all-powerful God. There is suffering in the world, and God is good, but not all-powerful. George Burns in the shower scene. Good guy, and there is suffering. I don't get involved in the details. That's on you. What about God's omnipotence? God voluntarily chooses to limit, this is the Jewish view, right? Again, God voluntarily chooses to limit God's power, God's divine power, in 2 distinct arenas. So maybe God is all-powerful, but God has metered what God does. God allows for human evil. It exists because God gave human beings free will. You can use it however you want. God's not going to stop you from doing this terrible thing. Hopefully God doesn't motivate you to do a terrible thing. I would say that that is a wrong application of any religion. And there's natural evil. The world's messy. There's illness. There's earthquakes and hurricanes. And those forces sometimes are forces for good also. It just exists in the world. We don't live in a bubble. It's not the Garden of Eden. It rains. I'm going to skip this one. We kind of talked about that. Yeah, we can do this. No, we don't. We'll skip that. Okay. There was another video. We'll skip that. What about sin? What happens when you reject what God requires of you? God says, don't eat a pepperoni pizza. Again, I keep coming back. You're all going to go out and have pizza. God says, don't eat a pepperoni pizza. And you eat a pepperoni pizza. Should I not stand next to you in a lightning storm? Are you going to get struck down? What's so bad about that? People sin. We are not sinners. Repentance is built into the system. Progress, not perfection. Rabbi Abahu said, great is repentance, for it preceded the creation of the world, as it is said, before the mountains were brought forth, thou turnest men to contrition. That may be a little poetic to understand. We have 2 conflicting forces within us. This is called a Yetzer. They're within us and they're part of us. They're both within us. A Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Ra. The inclination towards good and the inclination towards evil. It's that competitive part of you that wants to win the game, which could be good or bad, right? That competitive part of us, were it not for, actually I think I have the quote right here, I created within human beings the inclination to do evil, but I created the Torah with which to season it. As long as you occupy yourself with Torah, the Yetzer Ra will not rule over you. So we have this competitive desire. We have this need to always win the game. But we can meter that by following Torah, by living by certain rules. Right? If you're running a race and your desire to win, you just want to win the race, then in that rule, you can knock over the other runner, and you can win that way. The Torah of races would be, it's not fair to knock over the runner. You don't win by knocking over the other runner, you win by winning the race. That's the Torah part. So that desire to win the race is great. You're running, you're training all the time. That's okay. But how you use that desire and not to abuse it, that's Torah. That's Jewish life. Yeah.
Does it count as a sin if you don't consciously know that it's a sin? Like say, they just haven't learned about it, or someone is coming into Judaism. And
Right.
Say what they are.
Up until a point. So if you're less than 13 years old, this is what bar mitzvah means. Up to 13, if you commit a sin, you are not held responsible for it because you're not of the age of majority. You're not expected to know. After 13, you are responsible for your actions. I say this to every bar mitzvah student that I study with. I said, look, you've now got a license to drive Jewishly. You're going to be held accountable. If the cop pulls you over because you turned left and you shouldn't have turned left in that spot, you can't give the excuse, well, I didn't know. If we gave you a driver's license, you've accepted the responsibility of knowing all the rules. So after 13, you're expected to know. That doesn't mean that we don't have degradations of mistakes or errors. An error of omission, an error because I didn't fully understand it, is different than an intentional crime. Questions, comments? Were it not for the evil impulse, without the Yetzer Hara, no one would marry or build a house. It says in the Zohar. If you didn't want, you wouldn't get. And sometimes that want is, I want a house. And so I'm going to do everything I can, and I'm going to work so hard, and I'm going to do all these things so that I can have a house. At the end of the day, that house may become generational wealth. It provides a home and security and all these kinds of things. But how we go about doing it isn't, it is not the ends justify the means. Right? The means have to justify the ends in Judaism.
Why can't you build a house without the evil impulse?
You absolutely can. You absolutely can. But, let's just take the Vancouver real estate market for a moment, right? And at the same time, there is a way that in our desire to have a home, we can also step on people in the process. That doesn't make the desire to have the home wrong. Wanting a home and stepping on people in the process, the part that's wrong about that is the stepping on people, not the wanting of the home. So desire is not a sin. I want to, be with that person or whatever it is. Great. Do it in a kosher way. Do it in a respectful way. Don't do it in an abusive kind of way. And then I think this is actually the last slide, or the second to last. So who needs God? Prayer is not a matter of coming to God with a wish list and pleading with God to give us what we ask for. Prayer is first and foremost the experience of being in the presence of God. Whether or not we have our request granted, whether or not we get anything to take home as a result of the encounter, we are changed by having come into the presence of God. A person who has spent an hour or two in the presence of God will be a different person for some time afterward. Anybody want to unpack that? What is he saying there?
God is not Santa Claus.
God is not Santa Claus? Okay, a little more?
That when you experience the divine, whether it's looking at the sun coming down and seeing the wholeness of it, you will be changed in coming to that, and to that realization that you are not alone, that you are part of the whole.
God is not a genie or divine butler, but when you present it to God, it's you surrendering and giving it to God. What happens, that you've surrendered it.
Prayer is more of an intentional practice to connect with the divine that lies within us. It's not a third request. It's actually a connection.
Yeah.
It's like a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. Praying just one way.
It is a one-way or it's a two-way?
Two-way. It requires buy into the process.
So what if you don't hear a response to your prayer? Sorry?
It's still a response.
Right. So the response. So I think it actually goes to how we construct our prayers. You know, and back to what we were saying at the very, very beginning, which is, you know, what is, look, you can pray for anything, but what ultimately will result in your prayer being answered is whether it moves you, not moves God, it moves you to be the engine that can affect the answer to your prayer. That doesn't mean that you could, I don't think that means you could remove God from the equation and then this is just all humanistic. And I don't think that I'm not trying to say that. I think that you need God as the medium through which to channel these desires, through which to measure whether what you're asking for is right, is good, is holy, is worthwhile, is sacred. So in summary, bottom lines, definition, one God, primary demand that we be good to one another. That's the prime directive in Judaism. God created the world incomplete. There are problems left for us to solve. Imagine if God had done everything. Imagine doing everything for your kids. They learn nothing. Right? If you always tie their shoes, they never learn to tie their shoes. So God stopped tying our shoes. God created us B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. We have free will. We can build gas chambers or hospitals. Our job as Jews, and I would say as human beings, but specifically as Jews, is to be God's partner in creation, tikkun olam, to complete the task, to repair the brokenness in the world, a brokenness that we created, or a world that was incomplete. Because on the sixth day God rested. But there was a seventh, and the seventh day God rested, but there was an eighth day. The next day. God was done. Now it's in our hands. Be a light to the nations, teach the world about God. Does not mean convert others. Again, I'll go back to my earlier disclaimer. I'm not trying to convert you. Enjoy life and be grateful. This is the life. This is the reward. It's not about getting to the next level. Judaism is not the problem. Living is the problem. Judaism is the method through which to live with meaning. Judaism is the one true answer for Jews. There are other answers for other folks. I think that generally all these paths lead to the same place. Generally. I think there's some off-ramps along the way. There's some off-ramps within Judaism that I don't think get some of our most fundamentalists to the place that we need to be. Certainly not in the way that they treat others. The Kotzker Rebbe famously wrote, "I would never worship a God I understood." I just like that. It's complicated. It's complex. It doesn't lend itself to a tweet, right? It is a lifetime of study. That's why the Talmud is 37 volumes, not 37 characters. And that's why this is just a taste of Judaism. And if you're more confused than you were when you came in, part of that is because I can only do a taste, and part of that is welcome. It's a lifetime of study. And I have more questions than I have answers for the 25 years I've been doing this. Thus endeth the lesson.
Thank you.